Okay, good morning. I hope you can all see and hear me. Welcome to the launch of this groundbreaking report on intimate relationship abuse among young people in Ireland, commissioned by Women's Aid. We gather on this, the United Nations International Day of Violence Against Women, in a year in which the UN has sounded really strong alarm bells over the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence, including domestic violence during COVID-19. For those of you who don't know, my name is Durham McDonald, and it is a privilege to once again stand with Women's Aid for the launch of a report that is at once shocking, but one that also shines a light on the path to meaningful reform of both our laws and our culture that has allowed intimate relationship and online abuse to thrive. It's hard to believe that next year, 2021, marks the 10th anniversary of the launch of the Two Into You campaign. We've come a long way since then, but as recent events involving image-based sexual violence and today's report shows, there is still so much to do. Just because we are meeting virtually, and it's been fascinating to see hundreds of you joining in this conversation this morning as we came to but just because we're meeting virtually does not mean that we cannot interact. And this is very much a conversation that we want every single one of you to be part of. We want you to send your questions using the chat function. We want you to share the findings online, share your thoughts and observations. And you can do that using the hashtags Two Into You and also Yes, It's Abuse. So that's Two Into You and Yes, It's Abuse. We have an amazing lineup of speakers and thought leaders in this area for you to listen to today. We will have a short break for a little bit of a stretch and stand at 12:05, but we will be continuing through to 1 o'clock. I'm going to hand you over shortly to Sarah Benson, the CEO of Women's Aid, to welcome you and to give you an overview of today's findings. But first, we have a very special message for you from the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, who says, in what you will agree are the strongest possible terms, that there can never be any cultural rationalisation for gender and violence. Ladies and gentlemen, you won't want to miss this message.
May I thank Sarah Benson, CEO of Women's Aid, for the invitation to address your webinar today as we mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. May I also welcome the opportunity to commend most warmly Women's Aid on the new report which you are launching today, shining a light as it does on a particular and perhaps less researched aspect of gender violence, that of relationship abuse among younger women. The pursuit of equality for all citizens has been a focus of so many of the campaigns in which my wife Sabina and I marched and participated all our public life. We are both, however, acutely aware that after small but significant gains, these are struggles that cannot be overcome as long as there continue to be thousands of women, and indeed many men, who live lives as victims of unprovoked violence, often finding themselves trapped in cruel relationships that at their origin they may have entered into with so much joy and hope for the future. In February 2015, I received an invitation from the Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of United Nations Women to become a champion of the He for She campaign. This global campaign is one that has the engagement of men and boys at its core, seeking to bring one half of humanity together in support of the other half of our human family, and engaging institutions and organizations that are in a position to influence change within communities, and particularly in relation to those settings where women are most vulnerable to gender inequality and discrimination. Violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread, persistent and devastating human rights violations in our world today. Kofi Annan, then Secretary General of the United Nations, declared in a 2006 report published by the United Nations Development Fund for Women, violence against women and girls is a problem of pandemic proportions. At least 1 out of every 3 women around the world has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime, with the abuser usually someone known to her. Every day we wait for this appalling abuse of women and girls to end is a day too many. And let us once and for all put an end to the suggestion that any of this violence can be covered by an appeal to cultural practice. Violence is violence. Let us hear it across the world. Violence against women in Ireland remains shockingly prevalent, with 1 in 4 women having been abused by a current or former partner, according to recent statistics. We know from research that domestic violence tends to form a pattern of behaviour rather than an isolated event, that domestic abuse can also be linked with incidents of child abuse, that in its extreme form, domestic abuse can and does result in female homicide. Since 1996, approximately 250 women have died violently in Ireland, with 2/3 killed in their own homes. Domestic violence remains a problem at elevated risk for women who are part of a minority. According to the Women's Health Council, non-Indigenous minority ethnic women are over 2.5 times more likely to seek services from gender-based violence organisations. Trafficking and sexual exploitation remain in areas of gender violence that require increased international efforts to tackle. The statistics are grim. A study from the United Nations International Labour Organization estimated that 3.8 million adults and 1 million children globally were victims of forced sexual exploitation in 2016, with the majority of these women and girls trafficked into commercial sexual exploitation. Research has revealed severe levels of violence amongst trafficked women. 95% of women had been subjected to physical or sexual violence, with 75% physically hurt and 90% reporting sexual assault. One of the darkest consequences at the level of the person of COVID-19 has been its impact on levels of domestic violence. Calls to Gardaí regarding domestic violence increased by 1/5 this year, and I understand that calls to your organisation have risen by 43%. Violence and abuse impoverishes lives. It is often inflicted by those to whom victims are intimately related or connected, thus making their homes not the places of safety and security they should be, but spaces defined by angst, fear and uncertainty. Internationally, violence has become a weapon of war, with rape of women and men reported in several recent accounts, such as that which occurred in Sudan in June last year. Violence is not inherent in the human being. It is learned, copied, imitated, and absorbed in an insidious acculturation process. Such violence is often now correctly considered a form of hate crime, committed against women or girls specifically because they're female. Such violence may be sourced in ignorance and even invoked, as I have said, with an abuse of power as a tradition or part of a culture. We must assert, I cannot repeat it often enough, and in the strongest possible terms, that there can never be any cultural rationalization for gender violence, and such violence needs to be called out for what it is, an abuse of rights formed from a sense of entitlement, superiority, misogyny, or similar attitudes in the perpetrator, or because of a violent nature. This is a discussion which must be kept ongoing at the United Nations at every level. Women's rights for all of us, women, men and children, remain one of the great ethical challenges of our time. The international community has failed women for too long, and by failing women, failed humanity. Over 2 decades on from the World Conference on Women in Bacik and the subsequent Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, world leaders have, through the United Nations 2030 Agenda, reaffirmed their commitment to achieving gender equality and to the empowerment of all women and girls. As part of the 2030 Agenda, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, constantly on display at Áras an Uachtaráin at Sabina's request, are the blueprint to achieve a better, more sustainable future for all. They represent a moment of global solidarity and empathy, which address our international contemporary challenges, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate, environmental degradation, prosperity, peace and justice. Goal number 5, how wonderful if it were on the lips of every school child and teacher, calls on all nations to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. The assertion is that the goals can deliver transformative change for girls only if girls are consulted. Their priorities and needs must be taken into account. Girls should not be viewed in any simplistic sense as mere beneficiaries of change, but rather be acknowledged, respected, and heard as agents of change. Engaging women and girls in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals is therefore critical. In conclusion, we must here at home and abroad, and at every level, continue to raise public awareness about the issue, as well as increasing both policy making and resources dedicated to ending violence against women and girls worldwide. Let us all commit to vindication of what has been agreed at the United Nations. Call out nations and institutions who covertly or overtly make gender violence acceptable. Walk in solidarity with those in our society who suffer from emotional and physical abuse, and do all we can to raise awareness of this most important rights issue. This would be such an essential step towards true democracy, towards an Ireland defined by equality and a spirit of shared humanity. May I finish by saying what a privilege it is to recall the courage of the early founders of Women's Aid, whom Sabina and I knew and so respected their courage. And can I congratulate the staff and volunteers of Women's Aid who continued this work in new and challenging times. I wish you all a most stimulating and enjoyable virtual conference. Can I join too with you all in a plea to those women who may be living in abusive circumstances to seek help from Women's Aid and the Gardaí, so that the cycle of domestic violence can be broken, and that out of the darkness of such abuse they can emerge into a brighter future of respect and freedom. Bearbanach.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a powerful and a profound message from President Higgins. We are live streaming the event and we are recording it also, so those who didn't get a chance maybe to hear it can come back and listen to it in due course. But Sarah Benson, when we feel women, we feel humanity. The President did not mince his words today.
No, that was what an amazing, wonderful, powerful and unequivocal message from Uachtar Ó Nahéireann. We're absolutely honoured to have his input and of course recognise that he was in fact the first of the titular heads of state who became part of the He for She campaign with UN Women, so has always been a leader in this area along with his wife Sabina, long campaigners for gender equality. So we are absolutely honoured to have the opening address by Uachtar Ó Nahéireann to mark not only our event today, but also today being the very first of the 16 days against violence against women, an international initiative. So again, a very good morning and welcome to all of you. Currently, gosh, over 450 of you joining us live as webinar participants, and of course our colleagues who will be watching us live stream on Facebook, and I see the little numbers going up. So I'm not sure if it's better or worse to be addressing a screen or to have seen you all in person. I hope that maybe next year we'll be able to do a little bit more of both, but in these extraordinary times we're just so pleased to be able to share our report with you, to be able to create a platform to discuss these important issues, never more important than during the current crisis and pandemic. So as I say, such a wonderful opener from Uachtar Ó Nahéireann, and I also just want to say that we are so grateful to be joined today by Minister Helen McEntee, Professor Clare McGlynn, Vice President of Welfare in the Union Students of Ireland, Clare Austick, and Senator Ivana Bacik, as well, of course, as our wonderful moderator, Dearbhail McDonald. For my part, I am delighted to launch today our new report about intimate relationship abuse among people in Ireland. This report was a monumental effort, and so I do also want to pause just to acknowledge the epic work by many on our team to bring it to completion, right up to the wire, particularly Christina Sherlock and Ellie McMahon in our strategic communications department, who worked tirelessly to not only create the report, but to realise today's event. So this new report builds on Women's Aid's awareness work through our Two Into You campaign, which, as Dearbhail has said, has been running since 2011. And so today also marks the launch of a new Two Into You awareness campaign, which you will see a first preview of on your screens during our break later on, to stretch and pause and refresh yourselves. So I hope you'll have a look out and support and share over the coming weeks. It's predominantly a social media campaign. Before I say a little bit about the report itself, its findings and its recommendations, I would like to open with some words directly from young women who have had the courage to reach out to our services and share their experiences. This is voiced by actors, but it is their voices, and I think it's important that we set the scene, because it is their brave disclosures which have encouraged us to try and learn even more and do more to tackle intimate relationship abuse. So we have a short video which will air now.
Starting a new relationship can be an exciting time, especially when you're young and it might be your first ever relationship. After our first meeting, he was incredibly attentive. Flowers all the time, sweet text messages, or just calling to see how you are. He'd wait for me outside work to walk me home and would want to hear about every bit of my day. It all seemed very romantic. But unfortunately, what can at first seem like romance can turn into something ugly. 3 in 5 young people have experienced or know someone who has experienced intimate relationship abuse. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 11 men have directly experienced intimate relationship abuse. This abuse can take different forms, but all are designed to exercise control over the person being abused. Abusers get inside your head. They control you, coerce you, try to erase your sense of who you are. I haven't been getting any space to think for myself. It's as though when I hear my own thoughts in my head, they are spoken in his voice. Every choice, action, decision I make is done with the question, what will Martin say, do, think about this? My ex-boyfriend used to put me down in front of my family and friends all the time. And the way he would just give me that look sometimes, the look that said you're in for it. These days, it often also involves some form of online abuse too. Of young women who have suffered abuse, 1 in 2 experienced online abuse. With social media, it can feel like you're always on, always engaged and always available. And this means that sometimes it feels like there can be no escape from abuse. What had been several texts a day became an avalanche, and it came to the point that I felt sick every time I heard the buzz of the mobile because I knew it was probably him. Social media is being used in new ways to harm young women and girls, with image-based sexual abuse becoming increasingly common. I logged into my Facebook account one day to find my profile picture had been replaced by a nude one. It was horrible. I didn't know what to do. I was so embarrassed and so scared. Any and all forms of abuse have an impact on those who experience it. I became really frightened of what he was capable of. I started staying away from college as I was too nervous of him being there, and too tired of having to defend myself against his lies. My studies obviously started suffering, and I was also feeling sick from not sleeping and always being on the alert. Seeking support is difficult for many people who have been abused. I felt pretty suffocated, but also very unsure of myself. He's very convincing, and I wasn't sure who to trust anymore. Women's Aid helps those suffering respond to and recover from abuse. Unfortunately, abuse is common. It's important that people know they are not alone. I called Women's Aid and they told me it wasn't my fault. They also said that they had heard of this happening to other women. I felt so relieved that it wasn't just me. Abuse is distressing. Seeking help is brave. Recovery is possible. We're here for you. Women's Aid. Listening. Believing. Supporting.
So we have felt for some time in Women's Aid that more was required to better understand and prevent and combat abuse in intimate relationships among our young people. There is very limited research to help us gauge even the prevalence and nature of what we are dealing with in Ireland. And so with this in mind, Women's Aid was delighted to collaborate with Red C in order to try and fill our knowledge gaps and make the strong case for a greater focus on young people's and particularly young women's experiences of abuse at the hands of a current or former intimate partner. This report reveals stark and disturbing findings. Our commissioned research comprised a study amongst a robust nationally representative sample of 500 young people aged 18 to 25 years, weighted for our population as 51% male and 49% female. The survey also captured experiences of abuse which occurred below the age of 18. And then 4 focus groups were conducted to further explore some of the key findings of the survey. Sorry, slides. So our research found that abuse from a current or former intimate partner is common among young people. We heard that 3 in 5 young people have either personally experienced or know somebody who has experienced abuse in a current or former intimate relationship under the age of 25. It also indicates that it is a heavily gendered phenomenon. It is particularly women who suffer at the hands of male current or former partners. A startling 1 in 5 young women surveyed had experienced intimate relationship abuse, and 100% of them were abused by a current or former intimate male partner. This contrasts with 1 in 11 young men reporting having experienced abuse, with 78% experiencing it from a current or former female partner and 22% from a current or former male partner. And when we consider that how early that is in the life cycle of our young people, that statistic is absolutely cause for alarm. Even more troubling was the fact that 51% of women reported that the abuse had begun below the age of 18, with just 18 years old being the average age for young women who have been subjected to it. Although physical violence may be the most visible form of abuse and is probably the most commonly discussed in public discourse, this survey also highlights the prevalence and impact of emotional abuse, with 9 out of 10 women who suffered reporting this experience. As Women's Aid know from our decades of frontline work, this can have devastating impacts, but as it doesn't leave a visible mark, it can be both difficult to identify and also difficult to seek assistance and support for. Indeed, some emotionally abusive tactics can be mistaken, particularly in those early relationships, for passion or infatuation in the early stages. This report further details the worrying experiences and impacts of all forms of abuse that were reported to us through the survey, and that included sexual coercion, rape, physical violence, and coercive control. The report is published today, and you will find it through our social media channels or on our website after this event. One tactic that we particularly wanted to learn more about was online abuse and other abuse using digital technology. Alarmingly, 1 in 2 women who had suffered intimate relationship abuse experienced it online or through the use of digital technology. Abuse that takes place online is particularly devastating due to the always-on nature of life online. It is draining and can often feel inescapable, as it is difficult to completely block a persistent abuser from making contact. And neither is it a reasonable solution for us to ask a young person to opt out of or switch off their own social media presence, as this is so deeply ingrained in their social lives. And this came back strongly to us from the feedback from our focus groups. The victim should not suffer further because of the actions of the perpetrator. In Ireland, regulation and legislation has fallen badly behind the fast-paced digital world. So urgent measures are needed to prevent intimate relationship abuse occurring online, as well as combating the vast amount of misogyny and vitriol that women in general are subjected to every day on the internet. The impacts of abuse on young women are multiple and severe, with the majority reporting suffering low self-esteem, anxiety and depression, and becoming isolated due to withdrawal from family and friends, which is often a tactic and intention of somebody who is abusive in a relationship to isolate them. Some disclosed that they had attempted suicide or have been hospitalized as a result of physical acts of violence. And yet so many suffer in silence. When asked, 32% of young women said that they had never spoken to anybody about their experience or sought help. And they said that fear was most likely to hold them back from speaking out, followed by embarrassment and shame. Now, these are critical challenges for us to overcome. We have a number of recommendations that we're also highlighting today through our report, as these are urgently required in order for us to respond to our findings. Firstly, we need more in-depth research to further understand the levels of intimate relationship abuse experienced by young people aged 18 to 25 from a larger sample size, to learn more about prevalence, types of abuse that they're experiencing and the impacts on them. Research is also critically needed in relation to the prevalence of intimate relationship abuse among under 18s, taking into account, of course, all the ethical concerns in relation to research conducted with minors. Secondly, greater awareness and education is needed from primary school level right up to third level in relation to promoting healthy and to help identify unhealthy relationships amongst young people. This should be done in the context of promoting greater gender equality, respect, and mutuality. Teaching on intimate relationship abuse should be a key component of relationships and sexuality education, and highlighting sexualized abuse, respect for boundaries, and the importance of consent should be included at age-appropriate ways at all levels. Thirdly, a well-resourced general public awareness campaign is needed to increase recognition of the signs of intimate relationship abuse, and also, really importantly, to combat that fear, stigma, and shame that is stopping victims from seeking support. Awareness raising is also needed to let young people know that there are laws to protect them from intimate relationship abuse, and that specialist organisations are there to support them. And fourthly, and I know some of our speakers today will be speaking to this particular recommendation, the Harassment, Harmful Communications and Related Offences Bill 2017 should be urgently progressed and enacted to provide for the criminalisation of image-based sexual abuse and other forms of online harassment and stalking. The Online Safety Commissioner should be established as proposed in the Online Safety and Media Regulations Bill 2019, which also must be enacted. This bill should also address or provide for fast and cost-free civil legal remedies and procedures to have distressing and abusive images removed from online platforms quickly, where not all victims of this form of abuse need or should have to seek a criminal solution to that particular issue. And overall, we all need, all of us as a community, whether we are working in domestic and sexual violence services, whether we are social workers, Gardaí, student and youth activists, survivor activists, childcare workers, medical professionals, members of the legal profession, or simply concerned individuals. We need to continue to communicate a constant message that it is never your fault, that you will be believed, and that there is support there for anyone who suffers in this way, no matter what age they are. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Sarah, for that review of all of the findings. Again, I know already many of you have been joining in the conversation. Please do, whatever platform you're on, into you, and the other hashtag is yes, it's abuse. I also just want to welcome to the conversation Amanda and Tracy, who are both signing for us today. So thank you, Amanda and Tracy. Okay, well, our next guest is Justice Minister Helen McEntee, who, since her elevation to Cabinet, and indeed before that time, has made reforms to deal with gender-based violence and the treatment of all victims of sexual violence, whatever part of the journey they are on, a major government priority. Last month, the Minister committed to implementing the recommendations set down in the O'Malley report, reforms which, if implemented, could transform the experience of all victims of sexual violence. Yesterday, Minister McEntee also brought the Harassment, Harmful Communications and Related Offences Bill, which you just heard about, to Cabinet. And in time, and if we get that right, that could also overhaul the way in which the law and wider society deals with a whole range of issues, including image-based sexual violence. Minister, I know you're incredibly busy, but you're very, very welcome to follow on from the publication just of the findings this morning.
Thank you, Dearbhail. Well, good afternoon, or good morning, should I say, to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you. If I could first maybe acknowledge President Higgins and his inspiring words, and to sincerely thank him and indeed Sabina for the huge amount of work that they have done in championing this space for many, many years, and just to acknowledge that. I want to thank Sarah Benson, obviously Dearbhail McDonald as well, for inviting me to speak at this event, a really, really important event in terms of the launch of what is such vital information, but also to mark the annual UN Violence Against Women Day. Again, an important day in our calendar, starting off the 16 days now of raising awareness of this vital issue. Women's Aid as an organisation has been listening, has been believing, has been supporting women for so long now, since 1974, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the team for the huge amount of work that has been done over those years, but the work that I know will continue for years to come. We've just heard from Sarah about the absolutely vital research that has been commissioned through the 2NTU campaign, and I'm really keen to hear even more of what has just been said. This, as a campaign, shines a light into a dark corner, into a hidden side of domestic abuse, and that is in particular when we talk about young people and relationships. We often think of domestic abuse as something that happens in relationships where people are married, where they're maybe getting older. That's simply not the case. I mean, it is frightening to see the prevalence of this kind of violence in this age group, and to hear from Sarah, 3 out of 5 young people have either experienced or know somebody who has experienced. That figure is frightening, and I would agree with her. There's more research and more work that needs to be done, and I really welcome as Minister the opportunity to examine how this data and this information can help me and my colleagues across government, because it's not just obviously a justice issue, how it can help inform policy, legislation, and essentially bring about change in this area. Domestic and sexual violence is a problem in Ireland. It's a problem everywhere, but it is a significant problem in Ireland. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I think it has been brought to the fore even more so. We've seen an increase in the type of violence. We've seen an increase in the number of people coming forward for the first time. And I think this has shone a light where perhaps people were not focused before. As President Higgins noted, your national free phone helpline reported a 43% increase in calls, and this is, I can tell you, replicated across the board in all agencies. It paints a harrowing picture of many women across Ireland, the fear that they must be experiencing in their own homes. We have asked people, because of this pandemic, to save themselves and to protect their own health, to stay at home. And for many of us, our home is a safe place, it's a haven, but for so many people, it's not. And I can only imagine how frightening and the sense of fear and dread that victims must feel at the moment. We must do everything in our power to ensure that they know that support is there for them. The dedication of Women's Aid and their volunteers in this regard really has been absolutely fantastic. And again, I want to thank them, because they are frontline workers. They are people who are supporting individuals through this pandemic, and the unprecedented demand for their services has been met. And I really want to again sincerely thank all of the team for their steadfast diligence in this regard. In preempting the potential impact that COVID-19 would have or could have on victims of domestic violence. My department, in partnership with state agencies, with community voluntary sector, engaging with those who understand this more than anybody else, we have put together a number of special measures from the very outset. And just to outline some of those, firstly, we have provided additional funding. You cannot provide services or supports, put out campaigns, make people aware of the services that are there without that funding. So we have made sure additional funding was provided, and I have secured additional funding for next year, because we know this pandemic is not going to finish at the end of the year. The proactive approach that has been taken by the Gardaí, I think, really has been outstanding. Operation Fuisif have seen Gardaí engage with 15,300 individuals, those who have come to the Gardaí, but also they have taken a proactive approach in reaching out to people that they knew had been victims before. And it's something that I think, and I know from speaking to Gardaí in my own county and across the country, and the Commissioner, this is an approach that I hope will continue long beyond the pandemic. We've prioritised domestic abuse and childcare cases throughout our courts, the Legal Aid Board, the court services, including remote hearings for protection orders. And I was very pleased to see earlier on this summer the first protection order that was granted via a video link. And I think really it shows the direction that the courts can go and that need to go, particularly when we're supporting and working with vulnerable persons. We've produced and introduced emergency rent supplement, particularly for those who are trying to exit domestic abuse situations. And we've also developed an interagency plan to try and address and prioritise domestic abuse throughout the pandemic. And of course, with all of this, through that interagency approach, we're trying to ensure that there are lessons learned, that we can understand where we can improve the supports that we're providing, the work that we're doing, and obviously the very important input from the voluntary and community sector in that regard has helped. Of course, raising awareness is such an important part of this, and I'm very conscious that, as I've said earlier, domestic abuse victims, for them, their home is not a sanctuary, it's not a safe place. Our Still Here awareness campaign, which was launched and is continuing, the expertise of the Women's Aid played such a vital role in informing the content of it and how it works. And really this campaign is about spreading the message that services are still there, that they're still available to people of domestic or victims of domestic and sexual violence, but most importantly that the travel restrictions do not apply, whether it's a 5K travel restriction, whether it's people being asked to stay within their county boundaries. They simply do not apply to victims of domestic or sexual abuse, and it's so important that we continue to get that message out there. Our No Excuses campaign on sexual violence, this, I suppose it began last year and has continued and is scheduled to run into 2021 to the end of next year. This is a campaign that questions our own attitudes. It's not just about victims. This is about asking us, how do we respond when we see something? Do we turn a blind eye? Do we know what we're looking at? How do we support and help and respond to what we see? And I think it's really important that there is a whole of society approach here, not just something that's targeted for victims. The campaign unfortunately was paused due to COVID-19, and I want to sincerely thank Women's Aid for their support in helping get it back up and running on the 16th of November just gone. An important progress, I think, that has been made over the last number of years is Ireland's ratification of the Istanbul Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. And this was fittingly announced on International Women's Day last year by my former colleague, or by the former minister, my colleague, Minister Charlie Flanagan. Our adherence to the convention ensures a number of things. It ensures that Ireland provides international standards of protection, that we support women who are in abusive and violent situations. It also obliges us to continue to raise awareness, and in doing so bringing about a positive change by changing attitudes, and most importantly empowering victims, making sure that victims know if they come forward that they will be listened to, they will be heard, and that they will be supported throughout this entire process. Since becoming Minister, I have engaged with many agencies, individuals, groups, organisations. Unfortunately, like today, much of that engagement has taken place via video conference, and I really do hope to have an opportunity to travel around the country to meet with people in person. But irrespective of the format in which it has taken place, those conversations have happened, and I think a number of things have become very clear in those conversations. One of them being, and even in a recent meeting that I had with the Victims Helpline, is that public information campaigns do work. Requests for victims in those situations where we run public campaigns, where we raise awareness, they increase, whether it's advertisements on television, on radio, and on print newspaper, but also, and when we're talking about today, younger people, on our social platforms, so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is that our younger people are on, these campaigns, when they are run, people become more aware and they come forward. And I think it's really important that as part of that, the Programme for Government commits to implementing the second national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. And so much of that is focused on raising awareness and making sure that we continue in those campaigns. Preventing domestic violence, as far as I'm concerned as Minister for Justice, it is one of the most important responsibilities that we as a government have and that we face as a society. It is our collective responsibility for all of us to come together to tackle this extremely severe issue and this very challenging issue that we face at the moment. It's incumbent on all of us to take it from behind closed doors, where it has been for so long, that we shine a light on it and that we make sure that absolutely everybody in government knows that they have a role to play in this. It's not just about justice or equality, it's about housing needs, it's about social protection needs, it's about health needs, it's about education and educating the entire society. When it comes to legislation, and Dearbhail mentioned legislation that's coming down the line, but we have implemented changes in other legislation only recently. We have made changes to the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017, which for the first time gave a statutory definition of consent. The Domestic Violence Act of 2018 also introduced the offence of coercive control, and as Sarah has just outlined, for those who have been in contact or engaged with the study, 9 out of 10 women experienced this type of abuse. The effect of these changes and just these 2 changes in legislation really should not be underestimated. The change in our legislation itself means that this now has an impact and a knock-on impact on our criminal justice system and how it is approached. The strong response, I think, from the criminal justice system in delivering this clear message that domestic abuse is not just about violence has been very welcome. It's not just about the bruises, it's not just about the physical acts that take place, it's about the emotional abuse that can happen so often. It's about preventing someone from meeting friends, knowing where they're going, what they're doing, controlling their money, controlling every aspect of their lives. And we know that this can have just as a devastating impact as domestic abuse as well, and violence in that sense. We saw, thankfully, and again, this is a year for firsts, we saw the first conviction of coercive control just a few weeks ago, just in the last week and a half. And I think really it was such a monumental moment in this regard. It takes such immense courage to come forward in this situation, to go through what is such a difficult process. And I want to acknowledge the individual in that case, but to acknowledge all victims who come forward, because it takes such an immense strength to do that. But what it does is it encourages other victims to come forward. And I really do hope that that particular ruling and many others will encourage more to come forward, but also will help raise awareness for those who are not impacted by coercive control, to see it and understand it and know the signs, particularly if it's happening to somebody that you know as a friend, family member, or within the community. As Minister for Justice, as a young woman, I fully understand the need for women to feel empowered, to be able to come forward, to be able to understand where there is abuse. And you know, this is, again, as I said, something that we need to focus on as we raise awareness on so many different issues. I'm committed to improving, to advancing, implementing preventative policies around legislation, but I'm also fully committed to ensuring that we have the supports there. So, you know, while it's important that we raise awareness and that people can come forward, what's equally as important is that when people do come forward, those supports are available for them, that they're not turned away, and that they know that they will be supported. The Programme for Government, as Dearbhail has just outlined, makes a number of commitments and recommendations, and one of the first things that I moved on as Minister for Justice was to publish the O'Malley report. This is a report that was commissioned following a very high-profile rape case, where there was a very clear light shone on victims of domestic and sexual, in particular sexual violence, and the system that they go through and how challenging that is. On publication of that report, we very soon after published Supporting a Victim's Journey, which is a plan to support victims of sexual violence going through the criminal justice system. And there are quite a significant number of recommendations. The plan itself, we have already started to work on. We've set out actions, we've set out timelines, we've set out who is to implement these, and I can absolutely assure you as Minister for Justice, I'm fully committed to the implementation of these recommendations on this plan, and to ensuring that those who are delivering it are held to account. The Programme for Government also commits to an audit of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence and how it is organised over the whole of government. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not just about justice or indeed equality. The terms of reference have already been agreed between myself and my colleague Minister O'Gorman, and this is something that we hope will be concluded by the end of March next year, so that we have a very clear understanding of how domestic violence is represented across the whole of government, but to ensure that where we have policies, legislation and plans in place, that we know how we can drive them effectively and ensure that these are implemented. My department is also currently reviewing the achievements made under the second National Domestic Violence Strategy, which ran from 2016 and is still running and what could be completed at the end of next year. Based on that work that we're doing, this will inform the next strategy, which will then follow on into 2022 and beyond. And I'm fully committed and can reassure people that we are on track and that this strategy will be published at the end of next year. If I could take this opportunity maybe, and I've mentioned them earlier today, but just to thank the Garda Commissioner and to thank all of An Garda Síochána for their dedication in tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. They have strengthened their services themselves in this area. It's not just about Operations Freesive and COVID-19, but a huge amount of work has been done this year to ensure that all of the divisional service protective units have been implemented, and that was done by the end of September. These units are staffed by specially trained Gardaí. They deliver a consistent, a professional and a sensitive approach in the investigation of specialised crime types, and this includes sexual crime, it includes child abuse and it includes domestic abuse. And I know from speaking to victims, it's so important when you make that step to actually report a crime, the people who you talk to, that you engage with, that they understand that they are experienced in this area, and that no matter where you are in the country, that you get that same level of engagement. And so they are fully committed to that, and their training of all Gardaí as well in this space. Since 1974, Women's Aid has been working tirelessly on the front line to achieve a very important common objective: to stop all types of violence against women. And I think it's fair to say that society has become more progressive over the years. If we look at the fact that we have become more open, become more willing to confront uncomfortable truths of our past or those that are still with us, we are steadfast, and I am steadfast in our determination to try and address this and to confront the issues such as domestic violence. And again, I mentioned before, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has really shone a light for those who weren't aware of how prevalent it is, about just how damaging and big an issue it is in our country. And I'm determined to use that enlightenment, in a sense, to try and progress this area. I know it must be acknowledged the instrumental role that Women's Aid have played in achieving a wider societal advantages and advances in so many areas, and they have helped transform. But this modernisation in society has presented us with many new challenges. And again, Dearbhail has just outlined the changes that have taken place, and Sarah, in terms of the online presence that we now have to deal with, and the impact that that can have, and the fact that this can bring into the picture even a newer kind of abuse. We've seen in recent days the appalling and the harmful exploitation, mainly of women, where indecent images have been spread on the internet. And again, Sarah pointed out in her commentary that 1 in 2 women experienced online abuse. So this is not something that's new or just happened last week. I am fully committed to addressing this type of behaviour. It is not acceptable for people to feel that they can hide behind screens, that they can commit this type of abuse without there being consequences. And so I'm committed to taking action where non-consensual intimate images or any kind of those images of that kind are shared without an individual's consent, whether there is intent to cause harm or not. And so the enactment of the Harassment and Harmful Communications and Other Relations Bill, which was first introduced by Deputy Brendan Howlin in 2017, is a priority, and I made it a priority once becoming Minister for Justice. Any form of harassment, whether it's online or otherwise, needs to be addressed. And I believe that this legislation will bring us a long way in doing that. Maybe just to outline some of the offences that we are proposing in this legislation. Firstly, if you are found guilty of spreading, of seeking to spread or putting out images of an intimate nature of somebody without their consent, with intent to cause harm, you could face an unlimited fine and up to 7 years in prison. If you do the same, if you disseminate or intend to spread an intimate image of somebody without their consent, where there is no intent to cause harm, it is still a criminal offence and you could face up to 12 months in prison. We're also strengthening the areas around harassment. As Sarah has said, this can have a devastating impact on people, and we're acknowledging, particularly in terms of stalking, how devastating this can be. So the maximum penalty that currently exists is 7 years, and that's been increased to 10 years. So I really hope that this legislation, with the support of all of my colleagues from all parties and none in both houses, the Dáil and the Seanad, will be progressed and implemented as soon as possible, and will go some way to addressing the issues that we are seeing online. Another piece of legislation, again, as was mentioned, is the general scheme of the Online Safety Media Regulations Bill. This is something being brought forward by my colleague Catherine Martin, where there is an intention to bring forward an ombudsman and an online safety commissioner to establish a new regulatory body to oversee this type of content, which would mean that codes of conduct could be set, and if the social media platforms do not adhere to those, then they will face sanctions and they will face fines. So there's a huge amount of work being done in this area, but obviously there's a huge amount of work still to do. And you know, I think we can agree that while strides have been made, there's a lot more work to do. And that's why events like today, that's why this collaboration today, and why this research today is so important. So I will just conclude, because I think I've gone over my time, just by acknowledging the role and the expertise that has been so vital coming from Women's Aid over the last number of years, the support that they have provided to my department and will continue to support. I know there's a lot more to be done, but I think by working together, by shining a light on some of the darkest parts of our society, that we can address this form of abuse and violence, in particular against women, and that we can really start to make a change when it comes to the whole of our society. So I just want to thank you for inviting me to join you today. I want to acknowledge all of our speakers as well, and the immense impact that they have had and the work that they have done in this space as well. And just to reassure you as Minister, I'm fully committed to tackling all forms of violence against women. Thank you.
Minister, thank you so much, and I want to thank you both for your commitment and also for your participation today. Too Into You is trending on Twitter as we speak. But just before you go, because I know you have a very busy schedule and you won't be able to stay with us for the Q&A, there were just two things I wanted to raise with you on foot of your address. The first is, and perhaps I'm showing my vintage as a journalist here, but I remember when the first Savvy report was, the landmark Savvy report came out in 2002. And I wanted just to get your views on the need for that continuous data and research, and it's one of the recommendations in today's report, to capture the prevalence of all forms of violence, including online abuse, in order to inform best practice. The second question I have for you is just the latter point that you raised, Minister, in respect of the tech platforms themselves. Because whilst it's hugely welcome that the proposed new legislation will make it a criminal offence to disseminate material with or without intent, I have a question just in relation, I suppose, that if a newspaper published this material, we'd be up in court for doing so. So what are the plans to deal with the tech platforms that facilitate the widespread dispersion of very harmful images? And as you say, 1 in 2 women who've experienced abuse have experienced that form of abuse. So just before you go, if I could just beg your time just to address, 1, the question on the need to fund proper research, and 2, what do we do about the tech platforms that facilitate the dissemination of these images?
Thanks, Dearbhail. Maybe just to respond to the latter first in terms of the online platforms. So at the moment, I mean, we do have a number of laws in place. So from an EU perspective, there is an obligation on these social media platforms where illegal content is put onto there, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or anywhere else, where illegal content is uploaded, posted, passed on, there is a legal obligation on them to take it down. Now, obviously, the fact that at the moment it's not a criminal offence, it's not illegal for somebody to share an intimate image of somebody else, it has created somewhat of a grey area, because I know social media platforms will have their own codes of conduct. They, you know, when you become a member of one of these platforms, you sign up to that code of conduct, but it creates a grey space. So I hope that by making this specific issue a criminal offence, there will be a legal obligation on those companies to take it down, and obviously if they don't, there are subsequent consequences in that regard. Secondly, there's obviously a whole piece of work that's been done by my colleague, Minister Catherine Martin, to ensure that there's proper oversight that this does happen. And so the recommendations in the online safety bill, one of them being significant, that we have an online safety commissioner where they can set the codes of conduct, what's acceptable, what's not. And again, if those companies do not adhere to those codes of conduct, if they do not adhere to the strict rules and guidelines that are set down, then they will face penalties, and they can face fines and other types of penalties as well. So I suppose it's important that this work is done together and collectively, but you hope and you would like to think that a lot of these companies will actively come forward and engage in this process, and many of them have, but it has been a challenge in recent years. I think it's important to say that. So we do need everybody to come on board. But once the laws are there as well, I think it will. Those who aren't coming on board, it will force them to do so in that sense. In terms of research, I mean, I just can't say how important research is. I mean, it informs the work that we do in government. It informs the type of policies that we put in place. It informs legislation. It informs so much of what we do. And as has been pointed out already, and as you have said, we haven't done enough research in this space. It's not something that we talk about. I met with the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre this morning, and Noeline Blackwell said to me that it's only recently that people are happy to wear something, if they're raising funds for a marathon, that up until recently people didn't want to wear a t-shirt or something that talked about domestic or sexual violence or rape, because it's not something that people have been comfortable talking about. So the research wasn't done because this wasn't a space that people wanted to get into. So it's really important that we fund it. It's important that once the research is done, that it doesn't sit there on a shelf in a book, like a report, or like they often do, that action is taken and that we use that information. So I said at the very outset, I'm fully committed to making sure that this information, particularly around younger people, I don't think people realise, and even I'm shocked by some of the figures that I've seen, how prevalent this is with younger people. So I hope that this will inform us in terms of our education, in terms of engaging with not just colleges, but secondary schools, and even so far as to say primary schools, around the issue of consent and what that means. It's not just about domestic violence, it's about the relationship that you're in and what that should look like and what's a healthy relationship. So, it's absolutely vital. So I'm so pleased and want to thank Women's Aid for their work in this space, and to say that I will continue to work with them and others to ensure that this type of research can continue.
Well, Minister, thank you so much. I know you have a very busy schedule. Thank you for your time and for joining in the conversation. And indeed, our next guest really speaks to some of the challenges that we might face. She is Professor Clare McGlynn, who, along with her colleague Erica Rackley, developed the term image-based sexual violence. I don't know about many of you here, but I absolutely abhor the term revenge porn. And I think we're grateful to our next guest and to our colleague for developing a much, much more appropriate term. Professor Glynn, as you will hear, led a groundbreaking survey of image-based sexual violence across 3 jurisdictions. It was the largest international study of its kind. And she has worked intensively and proactively with politicians and policymakers in the UK to improve their laws on image-based sexual violence. As you'll shortly hear, perhaps they're not perfect, because here to tell us how the study went and how we might shape our own laws here in Ireland as they fall for debate in the Dáil next month, please give a warm welcome to Professor Glynn. You're very, very welcome, Professor.
Hello, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I hope I'm trying to share my screen at the moment. I am screen sharing. I'd like to start by telling you about Anna. 4 years ago, Anna started a relationship with Brian, and that's not their real names. Brian was very charming and lovely, but things became abusive very quickly, verbally and physically. During the relationship, Brian would get Anna to send him intimate videos of sexual acts, and he later said that he deleted those images. But when the relationship began to break down, Anna has described how one day he got up, he stuck a memory stick in the side of the TV, and all these videos just ping, ping, ping up onto the screen. And he looked at her as if to say, I've got these, and just remember, I have. When Anna ended the relationship, Brian got very abusive and threatening, including threatening to distribute the videos. Anna was at work when her friend called to say, excuse me, I'm stopping, the sound's gone.
Bear with us, we are just checking that Claire's sound is operative.
The sound is okay, this end.
Okay, can someone tell me if the sound is now working?
Yes, you're all good to go. We can hear you. Thank you so much, Claire. Please continue.
Thank you. So, in terms of the impact of on Anna, she had these videos of her distributed far and wide. They were on a number of porn sites, and by the time Anna saw them, they'd been viewed tens of thousands of times. These videos were available everywhere, and her friends and family and workmates had all seen them. Anna described the impact of this in terms of, she said, my whole world just crumbled. She said she couldn't go out, she couldn't go to school to pick up her daughter, she couldn't go shopping. She was completely withdrawn from the world and in a massive deep depression and anxiety. She broke down twice, she was in therapy. She said, I attempted suicide at one time. She kept trying to get the videos taken down. Sometimes this was successful, but invariably they kept reappearing. Anna continued, she said, it's been hell on earth. I've changed my hair color and I intentionally put on weight so that people wouldn't recognize me as the person in these videos. 4 years on, the impacts continue. She came off all social media for about 3 years and she's only just back on Facebook, but she's on and off it and she rarely goes out. These impacts are ongoing because there's no getting away from it, she says. It's just something that's never ending. So for example, she knows that one day soon, she's going to have to talk to her children when they're older, and she's going to have to tell them about these videos. Can you imagine it? She's going to have to tell them that they're out there so that if someone else comes up to them and mentions them, they can say, yeah, I already know about that, no big deal. And she works in a shop. And every day she fears someone coming in to mention the videos because that's happened in the past. So every day this is a lived fear for her. She said, you can't just get over it. And summing up her experience, she says, it's torture for the soul. It really is. I spoke to Anna over a year ago as part of a study with colleagues in New Zealand and Australia, looking at the impacts and experiences of image-based sexual abuse. And we interviewed 75 victim survivors, including Anna. And I want to tell you a bit more about the experiences they shared with us and the impact of the harms of these forms of abuse. Many have explained this form of abuse as similar to sexual assault. So Lucy told us, it's an abuse of me in my body. It feels like it's sexual abuse. I feel like it's on a par with sexual abuse, just the toll it's taken on me. And I know people might say that sounds like an exaggeration, but that's genuinely how I feel. A significant number of our participants talked to us about how the harms for them were experienced as a form of social rupture. So this is a significant devastation that dramatically and drastically changed their lives. It was extreme, unsettling, intrusive. In essence, victim survivors are distinguishing their lives before and after this form of abuse. It's all encompassing. So Margaret talked to us about the abuse impacts your sense of self on every level, because for me, it changed who I am as a person. Lucy talked about it being a nightmare that destroyed everything. She talked about it being life-ruining, hell on earth, and she felt completely broken. It's also the constant nature of this abuse. Maya talks about there's such a level of permanence that it affects everything. Anna talked about there's no end to it, there's no stop, there's no finale. It's not a crime that just happens and then it's done. It's something that's continual. And this is what we also need to recognize about these forms of abuse. There's this constant digital threat and vigilance required. Lucy said, I don't really have an online presence anymore. I'm just so terrified of people contacting me because they've seen these pictures. So there's this sense of constantly living in fear, a kind of overhanging anxiety all the time. Heather talked about, I was living a lot on sort of feeling on the edge. It was more constant apprehension. Every time I was getting an email or a message, is this somebody telling me it's been shared? Women also explain how it feels like a sense of isolation. It narrowed down my world. It's about shattering trust and relationships. Margaret talked about my trust has been totally shattered. Deborah, I trusted my friends and then I was absolutely gutted. I did feel very isolated the whole time. Danielle talks about it made me very reclusive in general. And Heather, I had just nobody to turn to because everyone had turned against me. I felt totally isolated. And it's also about this ending online communications. Julia talked about it isolates you even more in this day and age. So I'm not on anything other than Facebook because I'm petrified. This form of abuse has a silencing effect on women, and this is why it's so problematic. So in this context, what do we need to be doing about it? What steps can we take? It is very important that we introduce a specific sexual offence covering these forms of abuse. And that means criminalising all forms of the non-consensual taking, sharing, or threats to share intimate abuse. And I think this is really important here that we emphasise the core wrong here being non-consent, because that's the message that we also need to send out across all these forms of abuse. So it mustn't be dependent on proving particular motives of perpetrators, as it is in England and Wales. And it must not be dependent on proof of particular harms to the victims. Victims mustn't need to show that they've been harmed in particular ways in each case. So from the Irish proposals that I've seen, it's not yet clear to me, and I think this is what will need to be taken forward in debate, that it covers all forms of abuse. And that's because the current provisions seem to require proof that there's been a serious interference with the peace and privacy or actual harm to a victim. It's going to need to be made clear exactly what that means and exactly how that would be proven, and whether or not that in fact can cover all forms of image-based sexual abuse, or there's going to be a threshold that needs to be met and established. But the law reform is only ever the first step. We must be supporting victims to reclaim control. And that means the establishment of some form of Office for Online Safety or Digital Safety Commissioner. Now, there needs to be someone in this role that goes beyond working with social media companies and works directly with victims. So there needs to be some form on some format, so whereby we can give dedicated assistance to victims to removing images and videos. Because otherwise, as one stakeholder told us, victims are having to look for their own abuse online, find it, and then report it. One woman said to us, I wouldn't even be bothered about seeing my ex behind bars. I just prefer to be able to move forward and live life normally. But I don't feel I can do that if those pictures are constantly popping up. And we need to remember that criminal sanctions won't apply to everyone. So another woman told us, if you're someone who doesn't know the perpetrator, there's just no justification, no justice afforded to you. You're powerless. We need to help those victims as well. So there must be sustainable and significant resourcing for organisations supporting victims like Women's Aid, including services working with Black and minoritized women and communities as well, because we know they're particularly affected by forms of online abuse. We also need to ensure there's mechanisms to give individual support to women navigating the labyrinth of criminal and civil sanctions, because it's very, very complicated. There needs to be a policy and political role holding these internet companies to account. And I would emphasize here, it's relatively straightforward to hold companies like Facebook and Twitter to account. It's the porn companies that we need to get round the table and make sure they're taking action. And we need education and prevention initiatives, as have been outlined by the Minister. We're really at an important moment here in Ireland, and I really hope we can harness this opportunity for change, because Ireland has a real chance to learn the lessons from other countries and introduce here a comprehensive package of support and reform. Part of that is the criminal law, and this really is important to get right, and we must not rush to legislate. In England and Wales, we were very great and welcome to have a law in 2015. But ever since then, we've been campaigning to change that law because it doesn't cover all forms of abuse and doesn't give the support needed to all victims. Let's get it right here first time. And that's only there for the first step. We must get the practical support for victims and the resourced education and prevention initiatives. So as Faith described, she says she wants people, I want the people that have done this to me to understand that it's not okay. I just want them to know that what they did was wrong, and I want them to never do it again to anyone else. So let's work towards helping Faith to ensure that her vision is realised. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much, Professor McGlynn, and I know that you are going to be staying with us for the question and answer session later on, and we're looking forward to that. Now it is time for a break. It's just a 5-minute break, so perhaps just get up, have a little stretch. If you want, just have a little look at the video. We're going to be giving you a look into that relaunched 2 Into You campaign, which is trending on Twitter and other forms of social media, and we're grateful to you for that. So take 5 minutes. It is now 12:12. We will be back here at 12:17. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this part 2 of this morning's webinar. When I went to the afternoon. I want to introduce you to our next guest. Just as I've just sent out a tweet, if you want to ask any questions, there's lots already here, but keep them coming in and I'll try and get as many to our expert panel as possible. But our next guest really speaks to the content and the recommendations in today's report, because today's report is about the experience of young people, both men and women, between the ages of 18 and 25. And in fact, as you heard earlier, 51% of the respondents were men. This is first and foremost about our young people, and our next guest will speak to their experiences. She's the Vice President for Welfare at the Union of Students in Ireland. Please give a welcome to Clare McAustick. You're very, very welcome this afternoon, Clare.
Thank you so much. So Portia, thank you very much to Women's Aid for facilitating this very timely and important webinar, and also giving me the opportunity to speak at it. I can also see that we have over 450 people on the call, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you to every single one of you who decided to join today. So my name is Clare Austick, and I am the Vice President for Welfare with the Union of Students in Ireland, representing over 374,000 students across the island of Ireland. So just a little bit about OUSI. So we represent third level students on a national level, advocate on their behalf, lobby for policy development and legislation implementation to better their lives and improve the overall college experience, while also playing a key part in addressing societal issues that affect students but also the wider community. We often run awareness campaigns and take an active role in shedding light on less heard of issues that might not always be prominent in the mainstream media or attract the attention and time it deserves. So USI and students' unions have been raising awareness and campaigning to end sexual violence and promote active consent for decades. Often students were the driving force behind all the significant changes that we see today. We now have consent classes, specific sexual harassment policies, operational committees in colleges, a national advisory committee that's an oversight body, and a lot more education on the subject is for people to avail of. So while consent and sexual violence has been a much needed discussed topic over the last number of years, intimate relationship abuse among young people and image-based sexual abuse hasn't really been given the same consideration. So I'm here to talk a bit about the prevalence of intimate relationship abuse among young people, and hopefully motivate and encourage you all to commit to participating in the urgent cultural shift that we all need to see. A lot of young people have experienced intimate relationship abuse, or know of a friend who has been through a personal experience. But there hasn't been many surveys to attempt to quantify how many people have been affected and determine the scale of it. So we now know, thanks to Women's Aid and their report findings, that out of a sample of 500 people surveyed by Red C, 3 in 5 young people have experienced or know someone who has experienced intimate relationship abuse. 1 in 5 young women and 1 in 11 young men have suffered intimate relationship abuse. 1 in 6 young women and 1 in 13 young men have suffered coercive control by a partner or ex-partner, and 51% of young women experience abuse under the age of 18. So I know these facts have already been mentioned, and it is the launch of it, but I think it's important to remember that behind every statistic is a real story, a real person, someone who you may know, someone who it could have happened to, someone it might happen to in the future, or even yourself who has been affected by it. So these findings are very clear, they're striking, they're eye-opening, and impossible to ignore. I think there are a lot of people in abusive relationships who may not realize they're in one, or see the often talked about red warning signs worsen. When we think about intimate relationship abuse, we often automatically think of physical abuse, yet intimate relationship abuse can be anything from verbal to emotional to sexual, psychological, physical and online abuse. This includes the monitoring of friendships, disapproving of wearing certain items of clothing, undermining their partner in public, wanting access to passwords for social media apps, threatening to share intimate images, and smashing belongings. So those are just a couple to name a few. We as a society have a lot more work to do in terms of unlearning what's been portrayed as normal and acceptable in a relationship. such as associating overprotective, jealous and controlling behaviour with being madly in love and caring too deeply about the other person. We also need to understand how intimate relationship abuse impacts on the individual to reduce the amount of victim blaming and shaming for not leaving the relationship sooner. Questions like, why did the person not leave? How did they not recognise the warning signs earlier? Why did they not reach out for support? These are all questions that are very harmful, putting the blame on the person affected and removing the accountability from the abuser. The impacts of intimate relationship abuse are very damaging and serious, often resulting in the victim and survivor feeling alone, isolated from friends, living in constant fear, feeling unworthy and not deserving of anything better, and sometimes suffering from anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation as a result. I cannot emphasise the need and importance of the 2 Into You campaign run by Women's Aid, which spreads awareness on intimate relationship abuse by mentioning the warning signs to look out for and listing the supports available for help on posters and prime locations on campuses and online. There is a lot of good work happening, but we still need so much more. We have a lot to push for. We need to be more understanding, compassionate and supportive to help the people we care about, but also make the perpetrator answerable to their actions to successfully create a zero tolerance for this type of behaviour and abuse. In light of the heightened awareness around image-based sexual abuse last week, it's important to remember that this has been a violation of someone's privacy and their right to consent. Thousands of lives have been impacted as a result. Over the last few days, we've also seen the different levels of sympathy given to individuals based on who they are. It doesn't matter who the person is, the wrongdoing of sharing non-consensual images is still the same. The behaviour and intent of those involved cannot be excused in any way. The need for legislation around image-based sexual abuse is long overdue. We need to ensure that this does not happen again, but in the event that it does, that people, those who are affected, are protected and that the state supports them and legally recognises what has happened to them. Equally, we need to ensure there are well-funded services available and easily accessible to those who may need them. A lot of people are familiar and more educated on this issue, but this is not the first time incidents like these have happened. It's been happening each year, each month, each week, each day, so we must do better. We need to do better. I wouldn't be able to speak today without also touching on sexual violence and harassment, which is deeply embedded within our communities. It's important to see the relationship between sexual violence, intimate relationship abuse, and see how consent and abuse is at the core of it all. Students are the ones who have been hugely affected and have been leading the change on the ground for a significant number of years. Students have started the conversation around consent, supported peers during sensitive disclosures, organised rallies in support of those who've been affected, and lobbied for effective policy development to be put in place. We always knew that sexual violence was prevalent, but we wanted to somehow measure the amount of the people that have been affected by putting statistics to the stories we knew. So back in March, USI partnered with the Active Consent team to carry out the Sexual Experiences Survey, just to quantify how many people this epidemic affected. So I have a few more statistics and findings for you. So 29% of females, 10% of males, and 28% of non-binary students reported non-consensual penetration by incapacitation, force, or threat of force. The majority of students reported that they knew who their perpetrator was, and 29% of students that their perpetrator was a student at their college, and approximately 8% said the assault had taken place on campus. 44% of all students who reported experienced non-consensual behaviour, sexual touching, attempted or completed oral, vaginal or anal penetration. So the reality is that no one is immune to sexual violence. It can happen to anyone at any time, at any place, without any kind of warning. But the aftermath for survivors and their families is absolutely devastating. A lot of progress has been made, but we all need to work together. If we don't, everything will remain at a standstill. So finally, I would like to say that today marks a very special occasion, and hopefully one which will spark a mechanism and build on the existing movement to change our behaviour, our mindsets and our culture, to end any kind of violence, harassment and abuse. These issues and scenarios all speakers have spoken about are far greater than you or I. This involves everyone coming together and playing their part in changing the way in which we live and how things are done. The largest barrier in starting a culture change is getting people to listen and to care. People are now listening with open ears and are ready to act. So it's on all of us how we choose to use this opportunity and play our part in making a significant, meaningful difference. We need to mobilise people into action, educate one another, start conversations, question unacceptable behaviour, ensure victims have access to supports, and most importantly, ensure that our legislation reflects what we do and do not stand for. Today is International Day for the elimination of violence against women. The awareness, education, and action put in today needs to be replicated every other day. So there's a lot that has been done, and there's a lot that needs to be done, but I'm very hopeful for the future and that we're heading in the right direction. So thanks so much for organising this event and allowing me to be here.
Claire, thank you so much. I'm sure everybody listening will agree that the future of gender equality is in safe hands if this is what the next generation is able to articulate. I think you really brought to life the reality of this report and reminding us in such a vivid way that behind every statistic is a real story. And we look forward to chatting to you in the Q&A session, so stay with us. Our final guest needs absolutely no introduction. Her commitment to feminism, to human rights, to gender equality, and to criminal law reform as they relate to victims of sexual violence and indeed many other issues is simply outstanding. And I probably would say that about my former criminal law professor, Ivana Bacik. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you, Senator, this afternoon, and the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dearbhail. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's always difficult to know when one is speaking into a void. Well, what a morning.
Ivana, there's a problem with your camera.
Oh, sorry, Tom. It should be okay. I've pressed the video and it seemed to be working earlier. Apologies. Oh, here it is now. Yeah, apologies about that. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much to Women's Aid for the kind invitation to speak. I'm in awe of the incredible panel we've heard from, and we've really had such an array of substantive speeches. I want to thank Sarah Benson and the team at Women's Aid, especially Christina Sherlock and Ellie McMahon, for all the great work, and to commend them and Women's Aid, of course, for all the decades of work in supporting those who've endured domestic or gender-based violence. And in particular, I want to commend the bravery of those survivors and victims of gender-based and intimate relationship violence and abuse who have spoken out publicly, especially in recent years when we've seen such increased awareness. And of course, to thank those who participated in this important study, which we've heard about today. As we know, today marks International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and President Michael D. Higgins gave us such a powerful address in opening today's event, highlighting the international context for gender-based violence and outlining how the international community has failed women too long on tackling this type of violence, and in failing women has failed humanity. Back home, Minister McEntee has outlined how much work has been and is being done to tackle gender-based violence. And she mentioned the work of the Gardaí in running Operation Fuishiv and the other agencies which have kept supports available and accessible through the increased incidence of violence that we have seen, unfortunately and frighteningly, through this pandemic. Sarah Benson told us about the findings from today's important report, and the chilling findings from the report show us just how endemic the existence of intimate partner violence is. And that chilling figure highlighted on the cover of the report, 1 in 5 young women, really stands out. We heard some expert insights from Professor Clare McGlynn, who gave us compelling examples of intimate partner violence and who spoke about the core legal concept, the need to ensure that non-consent is criminalized, that distribution of images without consent, and that's the core issue, which I'll return to. And of course, we've just heard from Clare Austick, giving us the Students' Union perspective, which is so important, and highlighting what is being done on campuses and the importance of consent workshops. So again, to raise awareness among young women in particular, and young men indeed, about what consent means. So in the brief time I have, and I don't want to eat into the Q&A time in any way, I want to highlight, I suppose, one important finding from today's report and what we can do about it. Sarah pointed out, and we'll see it in the report, that 32% of young women who had suffered this sort of violence had never spoken to anyone about their experience of intimate partner abuse, nor had they sought help. So for us as legislators, for anyone engaged in policy or in providing services and supports, this must be an extremely alarming finding and of grave concern. Clearly, there are a number of ways we need to tackle this to ensure that women feel they can come forward, that they will be supported, and crucially, that something will be done to stop it happening again. So raising awareness is one key way of doing this. And of course, campaigns like the campaign being run by Women's Aid, the hashtag 2IntoYou campaign, these are hugely important. Campaigns around, yes, it's abuse, to highlight what is abuse, and to highlight in particular what it means to be experiencing coercive control. And we heard such clear examples of that from Clare McGlynn. So those in campaigns are very important. But so too do we need to ensure that our legislation matches the reality of women and girls' experiences. Minister McEntee did speak about crucial changes in legislation that we've made recently. And I want to refer to two pieces before I talk about the gaps and the inadequacies. So the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017, which she mentioned, brought in some really important procedural protections for survivors of sexual abuse and violence. In particular, Part 4 of that Act deals with abuse in the sex trade by criminalising the purchase of sex and decriminalising those who offer sex for sale in public. So that's important. And we heard from the President about the reality of abuse in the commercialised sex trade. Section 48 of the same Act offers us a statutory definition of consent. And that's hugely important. For the first time in Irish law, we have a definition of consent that will apply throughout the prosecution framework for sexual offences. And that is defined in the section as free and voluntary agreement to a sexual act. So it's not consent unless it's freely and voluntarily agreed. And that's a critical piece of law, alongside all the procedural protections that we have through the 2017 Act. We then have the Domestic Violence Act 2018, again, a recent piece of legislation. And Minister McEntee and others referred to the new offence we created in that Act. And I was proud, along with colleagues like former Senator Colette Kelleher and NGOs like Safe Ireland and Women's Aid, to really push for the introduction of this offence. The offence is coercive control. It's contained in Section 39 of the Act. And as the Minister said, we saw the first conviction for this very recently. You've heard what the definition is. Essentially, it's the undermining of a person through controlling and manipulative behaviour over a period of time. And it's hugely important to have this made an offence in criminal law, because until now, this sort of ongoing conduct in an intimate relationship was not expressly criminalised. And so we now see coercive control as an offence, and that follows from its introduction in other jurisdictions. I want to turn finally, I suppose, to what needs to be done still. And as we heard from Sarah, and as we see in the report, there are 4 important recommendations, but recommendation 4 is what I want to highlight, and that relates to 2 pieces of legislation which Women's Aid are calling on to be introduced. And again, for those of us who are legislators, this is a hugely important recommendation. The 2 pieces of legislation referred to relate to 2 ways in which we can address intimate partner violence or intimate relationship violence, and in particular where this violence and abuse happens online, as we're seeing increasingly. One is a criminal piece of legislation and one is a civil piece. And I'll just speak briefly about these and perhaps focus a little more on the criminal side. On the criminal side, the Harassment, Harmful Communications and Related Offences Bill from 2017 is a Labour bill introduced in the Dáil in January 2018 by my colleague Deputy Brendan Howlin. He brought that bill in following on from a Law Reform Commission report in 2016, because this is not a new issue. Back in 2016, the Law Reform Commission conducted a research on the law on harmful communications and digital safety. And the Commission recommended that the distribution of intimate images without consent should be criminalised explicitly. That is what Brendan Howlin's bill seeks to do. It was debated in the Dáil, as I say, in January 2018, and Brendan has spoken of it as Coco's Law. And that's because the bill is being is being promoted and being discussed by way of a tribute to the very tragically deceased Nicole Fox Fenton, known as Coco, who in January 2018 died by suicide after suffering years of abuse, much of it online. And her mother and other campaigners have sought to ensure that the distribution of intimate images without consent would be criminalised. And that's one of the key things that this bill does, as well as addressing other aspects of the gaps in our law currently that were identified in 2016 by the Law Reform Commission. So Coco's law needs to be made law. Coco's law needs to be brought through the Dáil and Seanad without further delay. And it's very welcome to hear Minister McEntee today, and indeed also yesterday in the Seanad, speaking about how she plans to progress it. The bill is back before the Dáil next week on the 1st of December. You've heard Minister McEntee speak about the amendments that will be brought into it with the consent of the opposition, including Labour and Brendan Howlin, to strengthen it and to ensure that it deals effectively with this sort of online abuse. But the crucial provision within it, which I think has been of particular concern to people and particular interest to people, given recent reports, shocking reports about extensive leaks of images, of intimate images of women and girls without their consent. The crucial provision in it is section 4, and this is the offence, the section that creates the offence of distributing an intimate image without consent. So to come back to Clare McGlynn's point, the non-consent aspect is a central part of this offence. I see from the question some people are asking how is the offence to be defined? I would say this, that the offence defines intimate image as a visual recording of a person made by any means, whether or not the image has been altered in any way. And that's one of the questions asked, is what if the image is altered? The current definition covers that. There will be amendments brought forward next week, and I know Women's Aid and others have also inputted and made submissions as to the sort of amendments they want to see to strengthen the legislation. But the key thing we need through this bill is to ensure that this particular activity is criminalised, and that it is done so in a way that makes the law effective, that we can use it against the sort of behaviour that we've seen unfortunately in recent weeks. So I can speak further about the bill and the other things it does, but just to say very briefly that it also would essentially ensure that communication will cover communication by electronic means. It updates our offence of harassment, and it ensures, again, an update of our law on stalking. And I suppose if anyone involved in criminal law will know that our current law on harassment and stalking dates back to 1997 and really does require updating, as the Law Reform Commission recommended. But I want to move on very briefly just to speak about the other piece of legislation also recommended by the Law Reform Commission, and which is currently in the shape of a bill promoted by Catherine Martin. And again, Minister McEntee referred to this, and it's also a recommended legal reform in the Women's Aid report published today. This is the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill 2019, and what this bill would do is provide civil, in other words, non-criminal remedies for those who have seen their images distributed without their consent. It provides for it must provide, and the Women's Aid report rightly points this out, for fast and cost-free civil legal remedies, such as takedown orders. That means court orders requiring platforms like, I don't want to single any out, but we all know the social media platforms we speak about, to require platforms to take down images that are abusive or that were distributed without consent quickly from online presence. The bill would also, of course, create the Office of an Online Safety Commissioner. Again, that's a major gap currently in our framework of protections, and I'm glad to hear the Minister acknowledge that. So I want to just conclude by saying that these are gaps, these are key gaps in the law, and the report has rightly identified these as requiring change. But there is, I suppose, a final point to make about criminal and civil law, which is that few acts of domestic or intimate partner violence are one-off. Few are isolated events. And the criminal law, and I speak as a criminal lawyer, is generally designed to deal with one-off events. And that is an ongoing problem for us in trying to address domestic and intimate relationship violence through legal means, because where we see ongoing patterns of abuse, it can be very difficult to tackle those in criminal law. And therefore, criminal law, and indeed any legal change, can only be part of the solution. A whole package of other measures is necessary in order to ensure that violence in intimate relationships becomes properly and effectively addressed for all those who are suffering and enduring it today. Gura Magwith, thank you.
And thank you very, very much, Senator Bacik. And I'm now going to invite Clare Austick, Sarah Benson and Professor Clare McGlynn back for our Q&A. And we have a number of questions. Some have been answered in the course of the speakers, but I just wanted to go back and just perhaps begin with you, Senator Bacik, and just ask, in terms of the proposed penalties, given as so many of the speakers have outlined the impact on people who are victims of this type of violence, do you think that the government will be striking a fair balance between the offence and the harm caused?
Thank you for the question, Dearbhail, and well done for chairing us this so well today. Just to say that the current provisions would provide offences would provide penalties of up to 7 years imprisonment, in particular for that offence under Section 4 of distribution of intimate images without consent. There are other offences provided for, including the sending of threatening messages and so on. But I think that's an appropriate penalty, appropriately serious, and I think the Minister did say in her speech she was very much committed to ensuring that there would be heavy penalties provided for this sort of offence, and I think that's fair and proportionate.
I want to ask Professor McGlynn if she's there, just in respect of it, because you've described correctly that we are at a very important moment in Ireland, and you've encouraged us to get it right first. And I was just wondering, could you just go over perhaps the traps that other jurisdictions have fallen into that we could perhaps avoid here in Ireland as we move to debate this legislation, this very critical series of legislation indeed, in the coming months? What could we do to perhaps perfect our legislation and learn from the mistakes that have been made elsewhere, as you see them? I don't know if we've Professor McGlynn with us, but I was trying to ask her that question. I just wanted to share with you some other research with you all that has been released today, which I think again speaks to what President Higgins described as that pervasive nature of sexual violence and gender-based violence. And that is a report by researchers from Trinity College, Dublin and Maynooth University, which examined the prevalence of sexual violence in the Republic. Over 1,000 people self-reported their histories. And Sarah Benson, almost 15% of Irish adults, rising to 20% of Irish women, have reported being raped. It is still profoundly shocking. Sarah.
Yes, I mean, I think at a certain point we just have to acknowledge that these are the statistics, that there is this level of prevalence, and keep pressing forward with what we need, not just legislatively, but also at a community level. I think Clare from USI spoke so well about the need for us to just, actually look at culture change, and, to commend the work of the third level students in driving that, but also to acknowledge that there's young people across all cohorts and experiences, who are, slowly starting to name their experience, and this extends through the entire life course of girls, women, and we did also capture the levels of prevalence among men as well. And of course, that's a concern if anyone is experiencing it, but I think we have to recognize that we have a very gendered issue here when we start looking at these different forms of violence and abuse. And I think at this stage, one of the things that we have really come to realize, both through this piece of research, but also an independent survey that we commissioned last year of those who've experienced abuse at all ages, is just what a chilling effect our cultural context has in terms of supporting anyone who has experienced abuse, violence, including sexual abuse and violence, in terms of coming forward. And we still have an issue with victim blaming. We still have an issue of excusing and looking to rationalize perpetrator behavior, which we don't have with nearly any other form of criminal behavior. And I think we really need to tackle that, because that's the context in which we're talking about legislating, and this will only be as effective as the environment in which we try and actually implement those laws, those policies.
Well, thank you, Sarah. We began today's webinar with a very, very strong message by a very powerful man in Ireland. And just watching over the course of the last 2 hours, there has been incredible support from men online for the discussion we're having today. But I wanted to ask you, Clare Austick, when we speak about the elimination of violence against women, we're talking about the perpetration of violence largely, but not exclusively, by men. And there's a really interesting question from Rebecca Staffens. Thank you, Rebecca. It says, how can we take a more proactive approach to educate men and boys to prevent them from even taking the first step towards domestic and sexual abuse? Claire, particularly in light of the recent controversy over image-based sexual violence, it was men sharing these images.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a very great question. I think first of all, when I referenced, I suppose, the need for cultural change and changing behaviour and attitude and mindsets, it's part of everyone. It's so much bigger than you or myself or anyone here individually speaking. So this kind of like requires like a community, a whole society approach, and it's multi-layered, I suppose, in terms of starting with the educational aspect by having initiatives such as consent workshops, bystander intervention programs, which gives people the skills to call out something that isn't fair or is wrong, or if there's microaggressions or language that we use, or even encouraging people to start having the conversations at their dinner tables or amongst friends, peers, after a match, or the likes where people congregate, and then also by having campaigns and awareness initiatives, and having it on social media by educating people. I suppose to change mindsets, we have to tackle the educational aspect, because if people don't understand what they're doing wrong or maybe being part of a problem, we can't get people to act on it. So it definitely does start with education, with the consent program and bystander intervention initiatives, and by having conversations amongst peer groups, but also awareness campaigns that national organisations and the likes run. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Professor Clare McGlynn, if I can come back to you, I know that you finished your contribution talking about the importance of education, and I was wondering, could you maybe offer some reflections on that? But then to go back to the initial question you may not have heard, as we are in this moment and about to enact a series of legislation that could have huge transformation here, what are the traps that we shouldn't fall into, in your opinion?
Well, in terms of education, of course, adopting a specific criminal offence challenging non-consensual sharing or taking of intimate images can help send that message out to society. But it also sends the message to victims that we understand you, we recognise your harms. And yes, Ireland has such a golden opportunity to reflect on how things have gone wrong in other countries. So in England and Wales, we celebrated as well the fact that we had new legislation tackling non-consensual sharing of intimate images, but there are thresholds in that legislation which mean in the end we've let victims down because the number of prosecutions are very, very low. So I'm confident that amongst all of you in Ireland, you're aware of these challenges. It's just that in the legislation as set down at the moment, there's a threshold around serious interference with peace and privacy, and my concern is what that would actually mean in practice. Would that mean that police would not take cases forward because they wouldn't think there was a serious interference? And that's in the context of sometimes there being a minimisation of this sort of harm. So there are clear lessons to be learned, although I feel confident that you have the knowledge and understanding to embrace them and to really adopt a progressive law from which we then in the rest of the UK can learn.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. I want to go back to you, Senator Bacik, because there's a question which I know is quite difficult in Irish law, but in relation actually to, any exchange of soft information or perhaps background information. A lot of people who've been in relationships that have been all intimate partner abuse would love to know, had there been a register that could have checked just to see, pre-existing behaviour. I think in some jurisdictions, including the UK, you can go and do a bit of a check. Is that something we could, in our constitutional context, or should be looking at? Of course, we can't vet everyone we meet.
Thanks for the question, Dearbhail, and I saw that coming in. I think it's referring to what's known in England as Clare's law. This this register, as you say, that allows people to check if an offender, if somebody they have a relationship with has a previous record of violence against women. We haven't implemented it here. I have read about it before, and I think it's something we should be exploring. But as you say, we do have very very particular protections in our Constitution, in Article 38, and in our criminal laws to ensure people's good name and reputation is protected. And of course, due process must be respected in terms of criminal proceedings. So I think there might be difficulties constitutionally in having a publicly accessible register of, for example, where somebody had come to the attention of the Gardaí, but a conviction hadn't been recorded, because that's the sort of soft information you're speaking about. So I think it's clearly an issue. And again, I'd refer us back to what I spoke about this unfortunate reality that so much intimate partner violence takes the form of a pattern, often over many years of behaviour, and the criminal law is looking really at specific one-off incidents. This is a real problem when we prosecute, for example, in cases of historic child sexual abuse. It's a real problem because the criminal law must refer to a specific incident on a specific date, and very frequently you might find there's a whole pattern of incidents. So look, I think we need to explore further how we can ensure that women in particular are protected against somebody who is a serial abuser of women, let's put it that way, but against whom there's no hard convictions recorded, but that there may have been guarded data. But it is a minefield legally, and particularly in our jurisdiction in terms of constitutional protection.
Can I go to another tricky question? So Clare McGlynn, I'm going to go to you on this, and it relates to the role of an online safety commissioner and whether we should adopt a carrot or stick approach to the tech companies. Obviously, Ireland, as the de facto HQ for much of the tech companies in Europe, is a very, very interesting place in theory and in practice when it comes to dealing with companies, and we see that across a whole range of issues. But just in relation to that, in circumstances where many people feel that the tech platforms themselves are publishers, and perhaps think that a stronger line should be taken with them, do you think what is the best approach to social media companies in circumstances where they're so integral to part of our lives? Is it carrot and stick, or should it be stick all the way?
Well, I think most governments think that the combination, obviously, of carrot and stick is necessary, and obviously, I think what we can see though with the mainstream social media companies is that they are on board, and we just need to keep encouraging them to take faster, swifter action. And I think that is relatively straightforward in terms of something that we can do. These sorts of regulatory mechanisms are being discussed around the world now. But I'd go back again to the porn companies. This is where, in much of this online abuse, these images are rife, and that's where it's really hard to get them taken down. And those are the companies that we need the real stick against, because they're not coming to the table to discuss this, and strong measures are going to be needed to encourage them and make sure that they do take this material down.
Thank you so much. There are two things that's very happening. I don't know if you can all see the chat function, but there's a lot of love for you, Clare Austick. And I think you all have a girl crush on the President of Ireland. I've tried to dismiss those questions as quickly as possible. But I want to maybe just go into a question for Clare from Magella Mulkeen. Magella, thank you for your question. It just regards to the campaigns within third level that students can participate in around the country, or that they can request their own colleges to take on. You can remember there were a lot of people sniffing lavender at the prospect of consent classes being brought into university campuses. But just perhaps you could speak to, because you're at the coalface of it, the nature of the campaigns and what more in your view needs to be done. And thanks, Magella, for the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think over the last number of years, local students' unions would have taken a heavy lead in terms of running sexual health awareness and guidance campaigns, and they usually last a week long, and they cover everything from sexual health to guidance, to consent, to options when there's a pregnancy or unplanned pregnancy. So I suppose the nature of the campaign is to be positive and promote, I suppose, positive consensual sex. So it kind of touches on all the different aspects that we kind of covered as well today. But over the last number of years, the main focus has been around sexual violence, harassment, and trying to encourage those who have been a victim of sexual violence or harassment to come forward, or to report, or to seek support and professional support by talking to someone they trust, report to the Gardaí, or even talk to the SU officers. And we provide training, disclosure training, to make sure that they have the skills to deal with any sensitive activities like that. So at the moment, there's lots of different campaigns around consent. So with the Minister Simon Harris, he would have announced a couple of months ago that one of his priorities is around consent education, and requested that HEI presidents take an active leadership role in it, and roll out consent workshops, promotion around the bystander intervention, asking for educational campaigns to be made available. So there's lots of different campaigns going out, whether it's with the National Women's Council of Ireland, Women's Aid. So there's lots of organisations that run national campaigns. The 2 Into You campaign, which I thought was brilliant as a student. I remember being in one of the cubicle bathrooms and having the poster at the back, and like some of the things that was said just really resonated with me. So even simple things, whether it's a poster, whether it's people talking about it, and whether it's a stand on campus or a talk or a workshop, or an online graphic, all these things with the messaging really make it a positive impact. So there's lots of different things going on at the moment, but in terms of what needs to happen, I think, first of all, there needs to be the kind of national holistic approach, from top down to bottom up on campuses, between families, the community, but also in terms of policy implementation in colleges, so that if there is an incident, that it's taken seriously, that it's robust, that the process is easily accessible for those who want to report something or come forward. And then with the legislation around image-based sexual abuse, so yeah, so those are a couple of things that are happening at the moment. So there's lots of great work going on, but we need to do more as well.
Okay, well, I failed you as a moderator because there are so many other questions, and indeed I'm just even receiving my private correspondence. As always happens, absolute horror stories when you begin to open up this conversation. Sarah, before I close, I just wanted just to go back to you, just your sense of today and where you go next in terms of the report and its findings.
Thanks, Dearbhail. And again, just a huge thanks to all of the panelists today and all of the audience members. I've likewise seen so many different questions spinning around. And I think what this tells us is that, you know, there's so much work to be done, and that there's a real sense of a collective commitment to do that. And I suppose just wanted to share that in terms of women's aid plans, you know, having commissioned this initial piece of research, you know, with Red C, we are very committed to taking the 2 Into You campaign, which Clare mentioned there, taking its resources, going out, you know, putting some more resources to it ourselves, to go out into the community, to perhaps expand our learning, but also expand our engagement. Also, you know, we hope to engage with, you know, additionally minoritized groups. So we would like to, you know, make part of that process to reach out to, you know, young women, young people from the Traveller Roma community, the migrant communities. We're very aware that there's additional barriers for, you know, disabled young women and men even, you know, our colleagues, you know, who work with young people in the LGBT community. So we've kind of been inspired by our initial findings and the urgency that they've given us to actually get out there. And what I will say is, because I'm aware that so many wonderful colleagues and allies are listening and part of the audience today, is that, you know, we hope we will be talking with you and engaging with you and learning from you, and so that we can kind of move collectively out to kind of continue this work into the future. And just as alluded to by both the Uachtaráin and also the Minister, I just personally also just like to thank our team who have just been doing such amazing work, and acknowledge again likewise our colleagues, particularly from the domestic and sexual violence services, and I know some of the children's rights organisations as well, who are listening and watching today. And just to say thank you. I think, you know, we know that there is work to do. There's really good things happening, but you know, let's continue this beyond this particular seminar, and into the future. And thank you, Dearbhail, as well, for your great stewardship today.
No problem at all. It's the job of a moderator to get people to their coffee break on time. But what I just want to say by way of conclusion is that it is a privilege as always for me to have been part of this conversation and to facilitate a debate around a really critical report that is going to be a brilliant foundation, I think, and just a timely foundation for future debates. What really struck me as always is the words of the victims. And there was one of the victims who described how it's torture for for the soul, and my thoughts are with anyone who has been a victim of this, and it continues to be. Despite the hard yards in this report, there is, as Sarah said, great hope to be gained from it. As Clare McGlynn reminded us, we are at a really, really important moment in Ireland. We have the opportunity to perhaps leapfrog and get things right, and to learn from the experience of other jurisdictions. Clare Austick spoke so strongly to the student population and to the real dilemmas that our young people are facing. Ivana, Bacik, as always, just so on the ball, and really it's just so great to have you there to guide this legislation through, and we thank you for your continued service. So I think one of the important things, Ivana, will be not just how do we get it right now, but how do we future-proof? How do we future-proof this legislation? So I think, you know, not very often in my career as a journalist over 18 years did I ever kind of think, oh my God, I think we're getting things right. But I think there's a possibility that we're getting some things right. And I'm just going to leave you just with one of the first slides that we saw at the beginning. And it relates to what Women's Aid has been providing for so many years. They're listening, they're believing, they're supporting. And I'll leave you with these words now. If he's too into you, Women's Aid is there for you. So thank you, everyone. And we hope you continue the conversation wherever you can.